Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. I should have known something was wrong the moment we stepped foot inside the house. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. But I didn't want to believe it. Not then, anyway. This was supposed to be a fresh start for my family. A new home, a place where we could leave the past behind. But as the days went by, I began to feel the weight of the house's history pressing down on me. It started small, you know. Little things. The kind of thing you could explain away if you wanted to. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. Old houses creak, they groan, they make noises you can't quite place. The house had been abandoned for years before we moved in, and I convinced myself it was just the wind, the old beams settling. But then, it happened again, and again. The footsteps. They weren't loud at first, just faint little taps, like someone dragging their feet across a wooden floor. It sounded like a child at play, slow, rhythmic steps. But when I'd check, there'd be nothing. No one in the hallway, no one in the rooms. I told myself it was nothing. The house was old, but the more it happened, the less I believed that excuse. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The sound had grown louder, more insistent. It wasn't just the house settling anymore. It felt deliberate, like someone was walking around in the attic. Someone who shouldn't be there. I turned to my husband, Thomas, hoping for some kind of reassurance. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. He was lying next to me, snoring away as usual. Of course, he didn't hear it. He never did. He didn't believe in things like that. To him, the house was just an old structure. No ghosts, no spirits, just wood and brick and history. "It's just the house settling," he muttered in his sleep. But it wasn't. It never was. The footsteps continued every night, getting louder, closer, until I couldn't ignore them any longer. That night, as I lay in bed, the room growing colder with each passing minute, I heard it again. The unmistakable shuffle of feet. Thud, thud, scrape. The sound of someone pacing, like they were waiting for something. My heart raced in my chest as I stared at the ceiling, my mind screaming that it wasn't real, that I had to be imagining things. But the sound was undeniable. It was real, and it was coming from directly above me. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, the old beams, but my skin crawled, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I didn't want to wake Thomas. I didn't want to seem foolish. But as the steps grew louder, I couldn't stay still any longer. I got out of bed, my feet cold against the wooden floor, and tiptoed to the door. The house was dead silent now, except for that persistent thudding from above. Every step I took toward the stairs, the sound grew louder, closer, thud, thud, scrape. I reached the stairs, and that's when I felt it. The air had changed. The stillness was oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I could hear the thudding above me, echoing down the hallway. It was then that I saw it. The attic door. Just a small, unremarkable door at the end of the hall, barely noticeable. It had been there since we moved in, but tonight it looked different. The air around it felt heavier. The house seemed to lean toward it, like it was calling to me. I stood at the base of the stairs, staring up at that door. The footsteps above stopped. The silence was suffocating. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I heard it. A whisper, faint but clear, coming from above. "Help me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The words were too soft, too strange to be imagined. I wasn't sure if they were meant for me, but they felt like they were, like someone was reaching out trying to speak to me. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. My feet carried me up the stairs, each step creaking beneath me. The air grew colder, more oppressive. When I reached the top, I felt a strange heaviness settle on my chest, like something was watching me. The attic door was slightly ajar, just a crack, enough to send a shiver down my spine. The footsteps resumed, but now they sounded different, like something was moving toward me, almost as if it knew I was coming. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The room was dark, suffocatingly so, and the smell of old dust and decay hit me like a wall. My flashlight flickered and barely illuminated the far corners of the attic, casting long shadows that twisted like dark fingers reaching out. But then I saw it. A small figure standing motionless in the far corner of the room. At first, it looked like a trick of the light, a shadow, maybe a trick of my mind. But no, it was real. There was something, or someone, standing there, a child, a boy, no older than 6 or 7, pale and gaunt, with wide, hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. My heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving mine, his movements stiff and unnatural. Then, in a voice so faint, it was almost like the words were being pulled from the air, he spoke. "I was here, before you." My breath caught in my throat. His voice was raspy, thin, like a faint echo from the past. And when he moved, it wasn't like a child moving. It was jerky, unnatural, like something was pulling at his limbs. The air around me felt thick, like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. I took a step back, my body frozen with fear. Then, without warning, the boy vanished, disappearing into the darkness, swallowed by the shadows. But the footsteps didn't stop. They continued, louder now, almost frantic, like something was desperately trying to reach me. I turned to leave, but the attic door slammed shut behind me, trapping me in. The sound of the footsteps grew deafening, thud, thud, thud. And then a voice, so close I could feel it on my skin. "You shouldn't have come." I spun around, but there was no one there. Only the dark, only the footsteps that would never stop. And now, neither would I. I never believed in ghosts. Not until I moved into that damn house. Before that, I'd always dismissed those creepy stories as nothing more than campfire tales or overactive imaginations. But now, as I lie here in the dark, I can't deny it anymore. Something is wrong with this place. When we first arrived at the Turner estate, I thought it would be the perfect fresh start. A beautiful, old house, full of character. At least, that's what I told myself. I thought the creaky floors, the drafty windows, and the smell of dust and age would just be part of its charm. But something about this house, something about its very foundation, felt off from the moment we stepped inside. It was like the house was watching us, waiting for us to settle in, to become part of its twisted history. The first night, the footsteps started. At first, it was just a faint shuffle above us, barely audible, like someone walking slowly in the attic. I thought it was just the house settling. After all, this place was old, probably had its share of cracks and creaks. But the next night it happened again. And then the next. Same time, same sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps, moving across the floor above us. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, the house settling, the pipes expanding in the cold. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something was out there, something unseen, something that wasn't going to leave me alone. I lay in bed that night, listening to it, the soft shuffling growing louder with every passing second, as if whatever it was in that attic was coming closer, coming for me. My heart pounded in my chest. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Do you hear that?" He mumbled something in his sleep but didn't stir. He never did. He didn't believe in things like this. He didn't believe in ghosts. He was a man of reason, a man who could explain everything away with logic. Ghosts weren't real, he'd say, just figments of imagination, tricks of the mind. But I knew something was in that attic. Something that wasn't alive. Something that was pacing above us, waiting. I reached for the flashlight beside my bed, my hand trembling as I gripped it. The footsteps were getting louder now. Every thud, every scrape, felt like it was drawing closer to me. I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to confront whatever was up there, but I had no choice. I threw the covers off and stood up, my feet cold against the floorboards. I crept toward the door, my heart racing in my chest, and stepped into the hall. The house was so still, so silent now. The footsteps had stopped, but I could still feel it. Something, someone, was up there, watching me. I reached the stairs. The attic door was at the top. My pulse raced faster with every step I took. The house groaned around me, the floorboards creaking as though it were alive, shifting beneath my feet. And then, just as I reached the top, the footsteps started again. Thud, thud, scrape. Slow, measured. They were directly above me. It was as though whatever it was knew I was coming. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the cold metal of the attic door handle. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I felt the air grow thick around me, oppressive, as though the very house was trying to hold me in place, to stop me from opening that door. But I couldn't stop now. I had to know what was causing this, what was causing the terror to rise in my chest each time those footsteps echoed through the house. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. A cold draft hit me like a slap, sending a shiver down my spine. The attic was pitch black, save for the small beam of light from my flashlight. My heart hammered in my chest as I stepped forward, my feet barely making a sound on the creaky wood beneath me. The air was thick with dust, suffocating, and the smell of mildew stung my nose. Old trunks and boxes were piled haphazardly against the walls, their contents hidden beneath layers of time and decay. And then I saw it. A small figure, standing motionless in the far corner of the room. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like a child. Pale, gaunt, almost translucent. It didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, watching me with hollow, lifeless eyes. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't right. This wasn't real. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in the grip of terror. The figure tilted its head slightly, its eyes never leaving mine. The footsteps above had stopped. There was only the silence and the unbearable weight of the thing in front of me. It didn't speak at first, just stared, and for a moment I thought I imagined it all. But then, in a voice so soft, so raspy, it sent a chill through my bones. It spoke. "I was here, before you." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My heart was pounding in my chest as the figure took a step forward, its limbs jerking unnaturally. It wasn't walking. It was as if it was being dragged along, pulled by invisible strings. It didn't seem like a child anymore, more like a puppet, its movements stiff and broken. Then, in the quiet, the footsteps began again. But this time, they weren't slow. They were frantic. The pounding above me was like the sound of something desperate, something trying to escape. Thud, thud, thud. The sound grew louder and louder, and before I could process what was happening, I felt something cold brush against my skin. "Help me." The voice, faint and broken, echoed through the attic surrounding me. The child, the thing, was gone, disappeared into the darkness. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, watching. I stumbled backward, my hand reaching for the door, but the weight of the house seemed to hold me in place. The footsteps grew louder still. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of something, or someone, was coming closer, and I couldn't run. I couldn't escape. "Elizabeth," a voice whispered. I turned, but there was no one there. I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to face whatever it was that had followed me up into that attic. But something told me I had no choice. Something told me that this house, and whatever was trapped inside it, wasn't going to let me go. And then, in the silence that followed, I heard it again, clearer now, the footsteps. But they weren't just sounds anymore, they were screams. Screams from the past, begging for release. The house had found me, and I wasn't going anywhere. I never believed in ghosts. Not until we moved into this house. It was supposed to be a fresh start. A beautiful old estate that seemed like the perfect place to put down roots. The house was grand, with its creaky floors and darkened hallways. The kind of place that felt as though it held centuries of memories. At first, I thought it had character, something unique that only old homes could offer. But there was always something unsettling about it. Something in the air, something I couldn't quite name, but it was there, lingering. The first night, the footsteps began. They were quiet at first, just the faint sound of shuffling above us, barely audible over the usual sounds of the house settling. I told myself it was nothing, just the old bones of the building creaking. But then it happened again, and again. Every night at the same time, the same soft shuffle, the same rhythm. Someone, something, was walking around in the attic above us. It wasn't the house settling. I knew that much. I tried to ignore it at first. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, the house playing tricks on me. But the footsteps didn't stop. They didn't go away. They grew louder, more distinct. At times, they sounded like they were getting closer. My heart began to race each time I heard them. I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, the sound above me drowning out everything else. I wanted to wake Thomas, but he never heard it. To him, this house was just a building, a thing of walls and beams and bricks. He didn't believe in ghosts. To him, it was all just the wind, the house settling, the natural sounds of an old home. But I knew what I heard. I knew what was above us. And it wasn't natural. That night, the footsteps were louder than ever. They weren't soft and hesitant anymore. They were deliberate. The sound of them was growing closer, faster, like something was pacing in the attic, waiting for me. I couldn't take it any longer. I needed to know what was up there, what was making that sound. I turned to Thomas, hoping for some reassurance, but he was deep in sleep, snoring away. I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, completely unaware of the madness playing out just above us. I felt the anger rise within me. Why couldn't he hear it? Why didn't he believe me? I stood up, heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to confront whatever was lurking in the attic. The air in the hallway was thick with silence as I made my way to the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity. The wooden steps creaked underfoot, groaning like the house was alive, watching me as I ascended. The darkness around me felt oppressive, like the house was pressing down on my shoulders. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The attic door loomed ahead, small, old, unassuming, but something about it felt wrong. I pushed the door open. A cold draft hit me like a slap to the face. The air in the attic was freezing, the smell of dust and mildew choking. It was dark, so dark, the kind of dark that seems to swallow you whole. My flashlight flickered weakly in the darkness, barely cutting through the gloom. And then I saw it. A figure. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, but no. There it was, standing in the far corner of the room. A child, pale and thin, with hollow eyes that gleamed in the dim light. The figure was unnaturally still, too still, as though it were waiting, watching. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot, my breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, its empty eyes locked on me. I tried to speak. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat, choked by fear. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. My heart was thundering in my chest, my blood running cold. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, the words trembling on my lips. The figure tilted its head, the motion stiff and unnatural, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Then it spoke. "I was here, before you." The words hit me like a physical blow. The voice was thin, raspy, like it had been dragged from the depths of the earth itself. It echoed in my mind, reverberating through the room. I could feel the weight of it pressing on my chest, squeezing the breath from me. And then, before I could react, the figure began to move. But it wasn't walking. No, it was jerking forward, its limbs stiff and rigid, as if something was dragging it toward me. Each movement was jagged, broken. It was wrong, so wrong. I couldn't look away, my body frozen in terror. And then, suddenly, the footsteps started again. But this time, they weren't slow, deliberate steps. They were frantic. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed from above, growing louder, closer. The thing, whatever it was moving toward me. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned, stumbling back toward the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. But just as my fingers brushed the cold metal, the door slammed shut behind me. I turned, heart racing, and that's when I heard it. A voice whispered, raspy, but unmistakable. "Help me." I didn't know if the voice came from the thing in the corner, or from the shadows, or if it was all in my head. But I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't turn away. I ran down the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground. The footsteps followed me, still echoing in the distance, still relentless. The house was alive now, alive with the presence of something ancient, something angry. I had woken it, and now I was trapped. I had to find answers. I had to know who or what was in that attic. What was it trying to say? What was it demanding? I went to Emma's room, my daughter. She had been quiet that night, hadn't stirred once. She hadn't heard the footsteps, but I knew she was sensitive to things I couldn't explain. I opened the door slowly, the faint light from the hallway casting long shadows across her room. She was sitting up in bed, her wide eyes staring directly at me, like she'd been waiting for me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I heard it too. I froze. "Emma, what did you hear?" "The footsteps," she said, her voice small but clear. "And it wants to talk to me." My blood turned to ice. "What does it want, sweetheart?" Emma looked at me, her eyes too old for her small face. "It says we're next." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My daughter, innocent and pure, was hearing it too. I had uncovered the truth, but the truth was darker than anything I could have imagined. The thing in the attic was real. It had been waiting for us. And now it was calling to us. I never believed in ghosts. I scoffed at the very thought of them. The paranormal was just a story, a way to spice up an otherwise mundane life. But that was before we moved into this house. Now, everything I thought I knew about the world is in question. We were supposed to be starting fresh, a new beginning in this old house. It had so much charm, creaky floorboards, high ceilings, and a sense of history I could almost taste in the air. But the house wasn't quite what it seemed. There was something in its walls, something that watched, something that waited. The first night I heard it, the footsteps. I convinced myself it was nothing, that old houses creak and groan, that it was just the wind or the house settling. But then, the next night, it happened again. And the next. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps above us, pacing across the attic. The sound grew louder each night, like it was waiting for me to hear it, to acknowledge it. I wanted to ignore it. I tried to. I didn't want to sound crazy, but the footsteps were unmistakable. There was something too real about them, too deliberate. I couldn't sleep anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear them above me, soft but persistent. Every time the footsteps grew louder, my heart beat faster, until it felt like the entire house was vibrating with the sound. I couldn't tell Thomas. He wouldn't understand. He didn't believe in ghosts. He never did. And so, I stayed silent, letting the fear build inside me, my mind racing with every thud, every scrape from above. One night, after days of sleepless torment, I couldn't take it anymore. The footsteps were louder now, frantic, as though whatever was up there was growing desperate. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned toward Thomas, shaking him awake. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice trembling, "do you hear that?" He stirred, but didn't wake. "It's just the house settling, Liz," he mumbled, already drifting back into sleep. He didn't hear it. He never did. I threw off the covers, my skin cold with dread. I had to know. I couldn't keep ignoring it. I had to face it. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, my hand shaking as I gripped it, and moved to the door. The moment I stepped into the hallway, the footsteps above me grew louder, closer, faster, as though they were following my every movement. I stood, frozen, at the foot of the stairs. The attic door was at the top, dark and foreboding. I couldn't turn back now. I had to go up there. Each step up the stairs creaked under my weight, but the footsteps above, no, they were waiting for me. They grew louder as I neared the door, faster, like something was drawing closer from the other side. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I reached the attic door. I had to open it. I had to face whatever was up there. I pushed the door open, the old wood groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. The attic was suffocatingly dark, the faint beam of my flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. The air smelled of mildew and dust, thick and heavy, as though the room had been locked away for decades. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and that's when I saw it, the figure. A small shape standing in the far corner of the room. At first, I thought it was just the shadows playing tricks on me, but no, there it was, a child. Thin, pale, with hollow eyes that gleamed in the dim light. My heart stopped. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice shaking, but the child didn't move. It just stood there, its eyes locked on mine, cold and empty. The footsteps above me had stopped. All was silent. I couldn't breathe. And then, it spoke. "I was here, before you." The words sent a chill through me, colder than the air around me. The child's voice was thin, raspy, and it echoed in my mind long after it had stopped. I felt my legs go weak as the figure tilted its head, its movement stiff and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Before I could react, the footsteps started again, but this time they were different. They were frantic. Thud, thud, thud. Faster now, louder. I turned to run, but the air seemed to thicken around me, as if the house itself was holding me in place. My feet didn't want to move, and my heart was pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free. The footsteps grew louder, coming closer, like someone was moving toward me. I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to see what was coming, but I couldn't stop myself. The child was gone, but I could still hear the footsteps, echoing in the darkness, getting closer. "Help me," a voice whispered, soft but clear, right next to me. My heart stopped. I turned around, but the attic was empty. The door slammed shut behind me, and I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, the footsteps following me, echoing through the house. I burst into Emma's room, gasping for breath. She was sitting up in bed, staring at me with wide, knowing eyes. "Mom," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I heard it too. I froze, my blood running cold. "You heard it?" I whispered. "The footsteps," she said, her tiny voice filled with something I couldn't place. "It wants to talk to me." The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing against me, suffocating me. "What does it want, Emma?" She looked at me, her eyes wide and unblinking, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the girl in front of me. Her voice was quiet, but her words cut through me like a knife. "It says we're next." My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just some unsettled spirit. This house was hiding something far darker, something older, something more sinister. And we weren't just living in its walls. We were part of it now. I wasn't ready for what I was about to discover, but I had no choice. The house had claimed me, and now it was time to find out why. I never believed in ghosts. I scoffed at the idea. It always seemed like a way to explain the unexplainable. A way for people to tell themselves that the things they couldn't understand were part of some supernatural scheme. But that was before I moved into this house. The house that's haunted me. The house that's twisted everything I thought I knew. Now, everything has changed. We moved here in search of a fresh start, a new beginning for our family. The house, old as it was, had a certain charm. Big, with high ceilings, creaky floorboards, and that smell of dust and age that I thought was cozy, comforting even. It felt like we had stepped into the pages of a storybook. But somewhere, deep inside me, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, that something was waiting. The footsteps started the first night. At first, I tried to ignore them. Old houses creak, right? It was just the house settling, I told myself. But then the sounds kept coming, night after night, like someone pacing the attic above us. Slow, deliberate steps, almost like someone was trapped in that dark, forgotten space. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. After all, Thomas, my husband, didn't hear it. He never did. He couldn't understand why I was so afraid. To him, this place was nothing more than a house, an old structure with character. But it wasn't just the house settling. It wasn't just my imagination. It was real. The footsteps grew louder, more insistent. I tried to stay calm, but each night they seemed to grow closer, more urgent. I couldn't sleep, couldn't ignore it. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard them, the shuffling, the tapping, the scraping. It felt like something was trying to get through to me, trying to reach out from the darkness above. And yet, every time I checked, there was nothing. No one in the attic, no signs. But the sounds, they wouldn't stop. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, when the footsteps became too much to bear, I decided to confront it. The fear coursed through me, but I couldn't just lie there anymore. I had to know what was making that sound. I stood up in bed, the floor beneath my feet cold as ice, and crept toward the stairs. Thomas was snoring, completely unaware as usual. I didn't want to wake him, didn't want to seem foolish. So I tiptoed down the hall, the sound of my heart pounding louder than my footsteps. When I reached the stairs that led to the attic, I hesitated. The air around me was thick, oppressive, like the house was pressing against me, but I couldn't stop. I had to know what was up there. I grabbed the flashlight on the table by the wall, my fingers shaking, and crept up the stairs. Each step seemed to groan beneath my weight. The silence in the house was suffocating. When I reached the top, I saw it. The attic door, slightly ajar, beckoning me like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. I pushed it open. The cold air hit me like a slap to the face. The attic was dark, pitch black, suffocating. The smell of mildew and dust filled my nostrils. It was as if the air had been trapped here for years, just waiting for me. The beam of my flashlight sliced through the dark, but the light seemed to absorb into the space around me, like the shadows were too thick, too heavy to allow it in. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't what I found. There, standing in the corner of the room, was a figure. A child, pale, thin. So still it almost looked like a mannequin. Its eyes, those eyes, hollow, black, and full of something I couldn't describe. I froze, my throat tight with fear. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I took a hesitant step forward, my breath shallow, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely a squeak in the oppressive silence. The child didn't move, didn't speak. It just stared at me, its eyes locked on mine, unblinking. My stomach churned as I stepped closer. And then, in a voice that seemed too distant, too hollow to come from such a small, innocent creature, it whispered, "I was here, before you." The words crashed into me like a wave. I stumbled back, my heart thundering in my chest. What was this? What was it? Was it real? Before I could process anything, the footsteps started again, louder. But they were no longer slow and deliberate. They were frantic. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was so fast, so chaotic, I thought the floor above me might cave in. I turned to run, but the attic seemed to shift, the shadows closing in, trapping me. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I bolted down the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest, the footsteps following me, growing louder, louder, like something, someone, was chasing me. When I reached the hallway, I turned toward Emma's room, desperate to find her, desperate to make sure she was okay. She was sitting up in bed, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide as she looked at me. She had been awake the entire time. "Mom," she whispered, "I heard it too." My breath caught in my throat. "Emma, what did you hear?" The footsteps. Her voice was eerily calm. "It wants to talk to me." I stood frozen, unsure of what to say, what to do. The house felt like it was closing in on me. The walls, the floors, the very air, everything seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. "What does it want?" I asked, my voice shaking. Emma just looked at me, her small face full of understanding I couldn't grasp. "It says we're next." Those words were a death sentence. I felt the floor beneath me give way. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And it wasn't done with us yet. It was then that I realized the house wasn't just haunted by some forgotten spirit. It was haunted by something darker, something tied to this place, tied to my family. And it wasn't going to let us leave. It had been waiting for us to come, waiting for someone to finally hear its voice. We were trapped, and the house was its prison. I never believed in ghosts. At least, I didn't believe in them until I moved into this house. Before then, I'd always chalked up the stories to fear of the unknown, to overactive imaginations and the eerie creaks of old buildings. But now I know better. When we first moved in, everything seemed perfect. A fresh start, a new home. The house had that charm, you know? Big, old, with creaky floorboards and windows that groaned when the wind blew. The kind of place that had character, a history. It was everything I thought I wanted. But as soon as the sun set and the house settled into its nocturnal stillness, something changed. The air seemed thicker. The darkness felt heavier. There was something watching, something waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling, no matter how hard I tried. It started small at first, just a faint sound, almost like the house groaning under its age. But soon it became unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, shuffling across the floor of the attic. Every night, like clockwork, I would hear them. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the sound was so distinct, so real. Each night they grew louder, closer. I thought about waking Thomas, but I didn't. He never heard it, never believed me. The footsteps became a fixture of my nights. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but as they grew louder, more distinct, I began to wonder if it was something else, something not so easily explained. One night, after they had gone on for hours, I couldn't take it any longer. I had to know. What was up there? Why was it pacing? Was it a trick of my mind, or was there really something in the attic? I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Thomas, grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the stairs. The house creaked underfoot, groaning as though it were alive. When I reached the attic door, my heart began to race. The footsteps had stopped. The silence felt suffocating. I could feel it. It was waiting for me. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Cold air hit me like a slap to the face, sending a chill straight through my spine. The room was dark, suffocating, filled with dust and shadows. But as my flashlight swept across the space, I froze. There, standing in the corner, was a figure, a child. Its pale skin shimmered in the dim light, its eyes wide and empty, staring at me like a trapped animal. I couldn't move. My feet were frozen to the floor as my heart pounded in my chest. Who are you? My voice barely escaped my throat. A fragile whisper. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, watching me with those empty eyes. And then, in a voice so faint, so eerie, it whispered, "I was here, before you." The words sent a chill straight down my spine. The air around me grew thick with something dark, something ancient. I tried to take a step back, but my legs wouldn't move. The child's gaze didn't waver. It felt like it was pulling me closer, like it was waiting for me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. That's when the footsteps started again. But this time, they weren't slow. They were frantic, wild, as though something was trying to break free. Thud, thud, thud. I spun around, ready to run, but the air was thick, the house pressing in on me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls around me groaned, the shadows growing darker, deeper. I had to get out. I had to get away. I ran down the stairs, my feet pounding against the floor. The footsteps followed me, echoing in the silence. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were chasing me, closing in on me with every step. I didn't stop until I was in Emma's room, her small face glowing in the dim light. "Mom?" she whispered, sitting up in bed, her eyes wide and terrified. "Emma, sweetheart, are you okay?" I breathed, trying to catch my breath. She didn't answer. She just looked at me, her eyes wide with something more than fear, something darker. "I heard it too, Mom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The footsteps. My heart skipped a beat. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I couldn't. I was too scared to ask. "I heard it too, Mom," she repeated, her voice filled with an eerie certainty. "It says we're next." Next? The words hit me like a freight train. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't good. Something had been calling to us from the attic. And now it was reaching out to Emma. I had to protect her. I had to do something, but I didn't know what. The next day, I couldn't think of anything else. The house felt like it was closing in on us, its walls pressing tighter, suffocating us. There was something I was missing, something I needed to uncover. I couldn't stay in this place any longer without answers. That's when I found it. In the corner of the hallway, behind a stack of old boxes, a faint line in the wall caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a crack in the plaster, but when I pressed against it, it gave way. A door. A hidden door. I pulled away the boxes, my hands trembling as I revealed the entrance. It was like the house had been waiting for me to find it, as if it had been hidden on purpose. I opened it, heart pounding, and stepped into the dark space beyond. The air was thick with dust, the kind of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. The beam of my flashlight flickered, cutting through the shadows. And that's when I saw it. Photographs. Dozens of them pinned to the wall. Faded, yellowed photographs of families I didn't recognize. People whose faces were blurred by time, their eyes watching me. And then, I saw one in particular, a family photo, blurry but unmistakable. A mother, a father, and a boy. But the boy's eyes, his eyes, were the same as the ones I had seen in the attic, the same empty eyes. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in on me. I staggered backward, my heart hammering in my chest. I reached out for the other photographs, desperate for answers, for something to explain what was happening. But that's when I saw it. The last photograph, yellowed and torn, it was a family portrait. But there, standing in the center of it all, was a man I knew. A man I recognized. My great-grandfather, this house, the bloodline. It was all connected, the child in the attic. It wasn't just a random spirit, it was ours. It was part of our family's past, locked away, forgotten. And it wasn't a ghost. It was something darker, something twisted, something that had been hidden, locked away for a reason. The thing in the attic wasn't just trying to make contact. It had been waiting for someone, for me, to uncover the truth. And now I had. But as I stared at the photograph, I realized one terrifying truth. The house had been waiting for me to wake it up. And now, I was its prisoner, to be continued. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.